During a weekend family dinner, my stepmother slammed her fork onto the table, turned toward me, and shouted, "Either you give your room to your younger brother, or pack your bags and get out." The clatter of silver against mahogany echoed through the room. Catherine didn't stop there. She marched over to the bay window and pointed a manicured finger at the driveway. Outside, the Phoenix sun baked the asphalt in a blistering 110-degree heat. Spread across the scorching pavement like garbage were my late mother's irreplaceable drafting compasses, microfiles, and leather-bound jewelry sketchbooks. The entire foundation of her design empire was just melting in the dirt to make room for Jesse's new live streaming studio. Catherine snatched the silver frame off the sideboard, the only surviving photograph of my biological parents. She ripped the picture right down the middle and dropped the pieces at her feet. "Tomorrow, I'll burn the rest," she sneered. A jeweler trains their eye to spot cheap, worthless fakes under a loupe, looking at Catherine's arrogant smirk. The imitation was glaring. I locked my jaw. I stooped down, retrieved the two torn halves of my parents' faces, and grabbed a single duffel bag by the door. I turned my back on them and walked straight out of the house. The heavy oak door clicked shut. My thumb was already flying across my phone screen, firing a rapid text to Jeremy, my trust attorney. They wanted an eviction, so I was going to give them one. The air conditioning in the hotel room hummed, crisp and freezing against my skin. I dropped my single duffel bag onto the carpet and sank into the edge of the mattress. Total silence. For the first time in 2 years, the suffocating noise of Catherine's entitlement was gone. At 27, as the majority shareholder and lead designer for my late mother's jewelry empire, my daily life was measured in flawless diamonds, microscopic precision, and high-stakes negotiations. I dealt with cutthroat diamond brokers and demanding clients every single day. Yet, under my own roof, I had allowed myself to be bled dry. I had quietly funded that sprawling Phoenix estate, paying the massive property taxes, the landscaping, and the skyrocketing utility bills entirely out of my own pocket. While I kept a roof over their heads, Jesse was quietly swiping my corporate cards, charging thousands of dollars in designer sneakers and high-end lighting equipment to fuel his pathetic online streaming channel. People always ask why someone with power and resources stays in a toxic environment for so long. They look from the outside and assume it's pure weakness. It wasn't weakness. It was the invisible chain of a survivor. When my father passed away, he left behind this desperate, fragile illusion of a happy, blended family. He wanted us to work. I stayed and endured the daily insults because I was desperately trying to protect his ghost. I had locked myself in a prison with no bars, completely convinced that absorbing their abuse was the only way to honor his memory. I was funding the very people who were eroding my sanity, mistaking my trauma response for family loyalty. To them, my silence meant absolute victory. They assumed I was a shattered glass they could just sweep away. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the torn photograph of my parents. The silver frame Catherine had smashed was still clinging to the edges of the picture. I unzipped my bag, pulled out my professional jeweler's loupe, and grabbed a titanium micro tool. It is an absolute reflex. When a piece is broken, a jeweler examines the fracture. I snapped the loupe over my right eye and inspected the jagged edge of the cardboard backing under the hotel lamp. The layers of the matting were unusually thick. A tiny, unnatural seam ran along the bottom left corner, sealed with a microscopic drop of modern adhesive. I slipped the razor-thin edge of my microtool into the crack and applied a quick burst of pressure. The thick cardboard peeled back with a dry snap. A hollowed-out compartment sat right behind my father's chest in the photo. Tucked perfectly inside was a tiny black USB drive. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I grabbed my laptop from the bag, shoved the drive into the port, and clicked the single audio file flashing on the screen. Static hissed through the speakers. Then came a voice. My father's voice. It was slurred, heavy, and laced with absolute terror. He confessed everything into the microphone. Catherine had been crushing heavy, unprescribed painkillers into his meals during his final weeks. While he was chemically paralyzed and out of his mind, she physically forced his hand to sign over the estate deeds. Then came the final, devastating blow. The audio captured his weeping admission that Catherine had already embezzled $2 million from the jewelry company's reserve accounts to cover her hidden debts. This was no longer a petty domestic dispute over a bedroom. This was a federal crime. My finger slammed down on the trackpad. I dragged the file into a new message, typed the word "now," and hit send directly to Jeremy's encrypted inbox. The next morning, Catherine popped the cork on a bottle of imported champagne. She was hosting a lavish brunch in my dining room, surrounded by her tight circle of Phoenix socialites. Silver platters of smoked salmon and pastries covered the mahogany table. Out on the patio, Jesse shoved his phone into his ring light. He was live streaming a grand tour of his new studio to thousands of followers, bragging about his massive upgrade and flashing a gold-plated watch bought with my corporate card. They were celebrating their absolute victory. Then, the heavy oak front doors swung wide open. Jeremy strode into the foyer. 2 Maricopa County sheriffs flanked him, their hands resting calmly on their utility belts. The chatter in the dining room died instantly. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes stopped. Catherine marched forward, her neck flushed with red, blotchy patches of outrage. She demanded they leave. She pointed at the ceiling, screaming about her signed deeds, her late husband, and her rights as the lady of the house. Jeremy did not blink. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a single, court-stamped document, and handed it to the lead deputy. It was the irrevocable trust. Bulletproof? Absolute. The estate never belonged to my late father. And it certainly did not belong to Catherine. It was mine. The deputy stepped past Catherine, his boots heavy on the tile. He gave them exactly 20 minutes to pack a single bag and vacate the premises for criminal trespassing and property destruction. Catherine's jaw dropped, the blood completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her face a sickly, pale white. Her manicured hands began to tremble violently. She looked back at her wealthy friends, her eyes wide with terror and humiliation. The socialites were already grabbing their designer purses, whispering frantic gossip, and rushing for the side exits to avoid the police. The grand illusion of her high society empire shattered in a matter of seconds. Cold sweat beaded on her forehead. She scrambled toward the stairs, gasping for air, her heels clicking frantically against the hardwood as she rushed to grab whatever she could carry. Out on the patio, Jesse panicked. He dropped his phone, cutting the live stream dead mid-sentence. He shoved past the deputies and sprinted out the front door, desperate to escape the humiliating stares of the neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. He bolted down the scorching concrete driveway toward his gleaming sports car. A heavy commercial tow truck was already backing up to the bumper. The hydraulic lift whined loudly. Jesse screamed at the driver. He yanked desperately on the locked car door handle, his knuckles turning white. The driver ignored him, casually ratcheting the heavy nylon straps over the tires. I had revoked the company lease at dawn. The car belonged to my jewelry empire, and Jesse was officially possessing stolen corporate property. The deputy followed Jesse outside and pointed a stern finger directly at the public sidewalk. Jesse stepped back. His chest heaved up and down. He stood completely stranded on the blistering, 110-degree asphalt, clutching a single gym bag. Catherine stumbled out the front door a moment later. Her mascara was smudged, and she clutched a wrinkled pile of blouses against her chest. The deputy stepped back inside. The heavy oak doors slammed shut. The deadbolts clicked into place, locking them out in the desert heat. The projector fan whirred in the center of the dark room. A massive, high-definition scan of my late father's estate transfer documents glowed against the boardroom wall. 12 of my top executives sat completely frozen around the long mahogany table, staring at the screen. I clicked my presentation remote. The image zoomed in on the signature at a microscopic level. My entire career relies on identifying the tiniest, invisible flaws. I spend 10 hours a day hunting for hairline fractures in diamonds and microscopic air bubbles in counterfeit gold. The flaw on the screen was glaring. The ink pooled unnaturally at the curves of his name. The pen strokes hesitated, vibrating with a jagged tremor that my father's confident hand never possessed. It was a textbook forgery, forced by chemical coercion. The double doors of the boardroom crashed open. Catherine marched in, her heels stabbed into the carpet, flanked by a towering, high-priced corporate defense attorney. She looked absolutely feral. Her lawyer slammed a thick, bound stack of legal briefs onto the center of the table, a civil countersuit. Catherine leaned over the polished wood, aiming a shaking, theatrical finger right at my face. Her lawyer announced to my board of directors that the audio confession was a malicious, AI-generated deep fake. They spun a tragic, twisted narrative right there in front of my own team. Catherine claimed the grief of losing my father had completely shattered my mind, causing extreme paranoid delusions. She was escalating the war. She filed an emergency medical petition to have me legally declared mentally unfit. Her ultimate goal was a total legal conservatorship. She wanted to lock me in a psychiatric ward and seize absolute control of my shares, my bank accounts, and the entire jewelry empire. She pressed a tissue to her eye, sobbing loudly to the executives about how she just wanted her poor, sick stepdaughter to get the medical help she desperately needed. Years ago, that exact psychological manipulation would have paralyzed me. I would have shrunk back in my chair and questioned my own sanity. Today, my pulse stayed dead calm. I watched her fake tears soak the tissue. I let her put on her entire pathetic show, knowing the trap was already set. 3 days later, we sat in the Maricopa County Courthouse for the emergency injunction hearing. The air inside the courtroom tasted like stale coffee and old paper. Catherine sat at the defense table wearing a conservative beige suit. Her hair pulled back into a modest bun. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the absolute, perfect, devastated widow for the judge. She radiated supreme confidence. She sat there practically glowing with arrogance because she thought she had successfully covered every single track. The night before the hearing, she had forced Jesse to scrub his entire social media presence. They wiped the live stream of my brutal eviction from the internet, completely erasing the visual proof of their cruelty and the destruction of my mother's property. Jesse had sworn to his mother that the video was permanently destroyed. Catherine bet her entire freedom, her reputation, and her financial future on the technical competence of a 24-year-old clout chaser. She smirked at me from across the aisle, fully believing she was about to take everything I owned. My attorney stepped back from the podium. Catherine dabbed a perfectly dry tissue to her eye, playing the tragic widow one last time for the gallery. She looked at me with this sickening, triumphant smirk. She truly believed she had won. She bet her entire freedom on Jesse's ability to hit the delete button. She just forgot who actually owned the cloud servers. I set my laptop on the wooden stand. One tap of the spacebar sent the recovered backup file straight to the massive courtroom monitor. Jesse's face filled the screen, wrapping up his pathetic patio live stream. Catherine let out a short, mocking scoff. She thought I was just playing the eviction again. Then the video feed cut to black. But the audio kept recording. The company server had captured every single second of the hot mic conversation in the kitchen after the camera went down. Catherine's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers, sharp and vicious. As soon as we get the company, we're locking her in a psych ward. Nobody listens to a crazy person. The recording picked up the clinking of champagne glasses. Then came her confession, bragging loudly about slipping heavy painkillers into my father's food and guiding his hand across the estate deeds. The heavy oak room fell so silent the air felt thin enough to choke on. A collective, disgusted gasp rippled through the crowded gallery, followed by the frantic scribbling of the court reporter. I kept my eyes locked right on Catherine, the flawless, arrogant mask completely shattered. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickening, chalky gray. A thick drop of sweat rolled down her temple, smudging her expensive makeup. Her chest heaved in rapid, suffocating gasps. She clawed at Jesse's sleeve, her nails digging into the fabric. But he was completely frozen. He just stared at the floor with his mouth hanging open. Pure, unadulterated terror swallowed them whole. The digital grave they dug for me had just become their own. 6 weeks later, the federal indictments landed. Today, Catherine is waiting for her fraud trial in a cramped, sweltering motel room on the dusty edge of the city, completely abandoned by her high society friends. Jesse spends his nights scrubbing grease off the griddle at a 24-hour diner just to chip away at his massive restitution debts. Sitting on the velvet sofa of my new Scottsdale penthouse, running a flawless diamond between my fingers, I finally understood the nature of their cruelty. It was the illusion of power from an empty wallet. In the high-end jewelry business, people bring in heavy, dazzling chains all the time, swearing they are solid gold. But the moment you scrape the surface, you expose the cheap, worthless brass underneath. That was Catherine and Jesse, their terrifying authority, their arrogance, their entire social standing. It was all just a microscopic layer of gold plating, financed entirely by my father's wealth and my silent endurance. The moment the law stripped those stolen assets away, they had absolutely zero internal character, grit, or intelligence to keep themselves standing. Underneath it all, they were just rusting, toxic metal. They didn't just lose a mansion, they lost the only thing hiding their absolute emptiness. Here is the shortened version of your final chapter, carefully edited to maintain the emotional pacing, the profound psychological lessons, and the viral punchiness, bringing it to write around 4,000 characters. The gavel fell on a Tuesday morning in federal court. The judge looked down with absolute disgust, handing Catherine 84 months in federal prison, with zero eligibility for early parole for at least 60 months. She was ordered to pay $2,142,000 in restitution. Jesse barely avoided a cell. He received 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and a 40% wage garnishment stripped directly from his diner paychecks. While the law dismantled their freedom, society dismantled their pride. The elite Phoenix socialites they clung to erased them overnight. The country club revoked Catherine's membership, and their gated community quietly blacklisted them. They lost the only currency they valued, becoming a pathetic joke whispered about at the very brunch tables they used to host. 7 months into her sentence, a wrinkled envelope arrived at my studio. It was a 4-page, tear-stained letter from Catherine, playing the ultimate victim. She weaponized my late father's memory, claiming he would be heartbroken to see his wife in a cage, insisting we were still family. A year ago, that letter would have triggered a massive panic attack. I would have drowned in misplaced guilt. Today, my pulse held a steady, calm rhythm. I stopped reading after the second paragraph. Pity and anger were entirely absent. I just felt a profound, peaceful emptiness. I folded the paper, walked across the hardwood floor, and dropped it into the industrial shredder. The steel blades chewed through her final attempt at psychological control. Silence is the only language a narcissist cannot manipulate, and it was the only answer she would ever get from me. My reality today is unrecognizable from the suffocating anxiety of that old estate. I live in a sun-drenched penthouse overlooking the Camelback Mountains. The air is light, entirely free from the dread of walking on eggshells. I hosted Thanksgiving dinner this year around a massive cedar table, surrounded by people who genuinely value me. Jeremy, my attorney who became a fiercely protective uncle, sat at the head. Friends who stood by me through the darkest days filled the remaining chairs. We drank wine and laughed until our ribs ached. Nobody shouted demands or belittled my career. I built an impenetrable sanctuary where my peace is the priority. Trust is not a birthright inherited through a marriage license. It is a premium currency earned through undeniable respect. Looking back, the hardest part of surviving a toxic family isn't the financial loss. It's the psychological warfare. Catherine didn't just want a luxury mansion. Her hollow identity required the erasure of my existence to validate her insecure position. My deepest flaw was believing that absorbing her abuse was a noble badge of honor. Protecting a family that only exploits you isn't loyalty, it's pure self-destruction. If you are listening to this, internalize 3 absolute rules for your survival. Rule number 1. The loudest people are usually the emptiest. True power doesn't scream across a table or post fake flexes online. It is quiet. It calculates and relies on unbreakable boundaries. Rule number 2. Loyalty without respect is self-sabotage. DNA does not grant anyone a VIP pass to treat you like a doormat. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Rule number 3. Never negotiate with a parasite. You cannot heal a toxic person with generosity. Giving them your money or patience only funds the weapons they will turn around and use against you. True karmic justice is simply walking away. What is it costing you to stay silent to keep the peace for people actively at war with you? Drop a comment if you've ever had to cut a toxic branch to save your own tree. Your peace is worth protecting at all costs. If you believe the ultimate revenge is absolute success, hit subscribe. I am Jenna, and I am completely free. I will see you in the next one.